Okay, guys, we're going to go ahead and start. We're going to read chapter 1 today of My Teacher is an Alien. I want you to go ahead and grab your book. I want you to turn to page 1. That's where we're going to start. Chapter 1 is called Missing One Sixth Grade Teacher. I want you to be in a good, comfy place so that you can follow along. Make sure that you have what you need. There's no distractions in the back, okay? So get yourself situated so you can pay attention. "Hey, geekoid," yelled Duncan Dougal as he snatched Peter Thompson's book out of his hand. "Why do you read so much? Don't you know how to watch TV?" Poor Peter. I could see that he wanted to grab the book back from Duncan, but I also knew that if he tried, Duncan would cream him. Sometimes I wonder if Duncan's mother dropped him on his head when he was a baby. I mean, something must have made him decide to spend his entire life making other people miserable. Otherwise, why would he spend so much time picking on a kid like Peter Thompson? Peter never bothers anyone. Heck, the only thing he really wants to be is left alone so he can read whatever book he has his nose stuck in at the moment. That doesn't seem like too much to ask to me. But Duncan takes Peter's reading as a personal insult. So here it was, the first day back from spring vacation. We hadn't even gone into the school yet, and I could tell by the look on Duncan Dougal's face that the spring fight season was about to begin. I clutched my piccolo case to my chest, and I watched as Peter's pale face began to turn red. Peter blushed at almost anything. He was tall and thin and wore thick glasses, and he was the smartest person I'd ever met, grown-ups included. The problem was, it was all book smarts. Peter had absolutely no idea how to deal with a creep like Duncan. Actually, neither did I. If I did, I would have stopped him. But the one time I had tried to come between Duncan and Peter, I ended up with a black eye myself. Duncan claimed it was an accident, of course. "Susan just jumped right in front of my fist," he said, as if I was the one who had done something wrong. To tell the truth, I think Duncan punched me on purpose. Most guys wouldn't hit a girl, but Duncan doesn't mind. It was his way of warning me to keep my nose out of his business. As I watched Duncan squinting down at Peter, it occurred to me that sixth grade can be a dangerous place if you don't watch out. Stacy Benet was standing a few feet away from Peter, pressed against the school wall and looking nervous. Stacy is this incredibly good kid who never gets in trouble, ever. She hates fights even more than I do. She had just started edging her way over toward me when Duncan ran his foot through a puddle and splashed dirty water all over Peter's jeans. "Cut it out, Duncan," said Peter. "Cut it out, Duncan," mimicked Duncan in a whiny sing-song voice. Anyone who knew Duncan could see he was gearing up for a fight. But it wasn't necessarily going to be with Peter, since Peter usually just took whatever Duncan dished out. I figured Duncan was using him as a warm-up. So I was a little surprised when he tossed Peter's book into the puddle. Even Duncan should have known that's something you just don't do to Peter. "Oops," he said maliciously. "I dropped it." I heard Stacy gasp as Peter launched himself off the wall and bashed his head into Duncan's stomach. Within seconds, the two of them were rolling around on the ground. "I hate it when this happens," said Stacy, as the boys surrounded Duncan and Peter, or Peter and Duncan, in a shouting, cheering circle. The fight hadn't gone on more than 10 seconds when a tall, blond man came pushing through the crowd. Without saying anything, he grabbed the two fighters and hauled them to their feet. Wow, I thought when I saw him lift the two of them right off the ground. This guy is strong. "Stop," he said. Then he gave each of them a shake and set them back down to their feet. "Peter started it," said Duncan. He's such a creep, and he probably didn't even know he was lying. Excuse me. Peter wiped the back of his hand across his mouth. I did not, he said sullenly. I could see that his hand was trembling. No more, said the tall man, as if he really didn't care who started it. Do you understand? Yes, sir, mumbled Peter. I wanted to shake him. He made it sound as if the whole thing had been his fault. Do you understand? Said the tall man again, looking directly at Duncan. Sure, said Duncan. I got it. Good, said the tall man. Then he turned on his heel and he marched back into the school. Duncan made a face at the man's back, then wandered off to find someone else to pick on. Who was that? Asked Peter, as I handed him a soggy book. Who knows? I never saw him before. He's probably a new sub. Come on, let's just go inside. Peter and I were usually the first ones into the school, but not by much. Our whole class went in early. That's because our teacher, Miss Marie Schwartz, was totally great. The thing I liked best about having her was she was the only teacher in Kennettuck Falls Elementary who always did a play with her class. I've always wanted to be an actress when I grow up, but until 6th grade, I never had the chance to find out what it was like to be on stage. The play would be our last major project, and we had planned to start rehearsals right after spring vacation. Unfortunately, when we got to our room, Mrs. Schwartz was nowhere to be seen. That tall, blond man was standing beside her desk, talking to a short, red-faced man who had almost no hair, our school principal, Mr. Bleekman. Where was Miss Schwartz? Peter and I went to our desk. I wasn't happy. I had a bad feeling about this whole thing. The sub is handsome, whispered Stacy, who had come in behind us. I suppose so, I said grudgingly. Where do you suppose Miss Schwartz is? Stacy shrugged. Maybe she's sick, or maybe her plane didn't make it back on time. That happened to my 3rd grade teacher once. I nodded. That was okay. It was disappointing to come back to see someone beside Miss Schwartz, but I could cope with it for a day or two. The other kids came into the room. Because Dr. Bleekman was there, everyone was super quiet. The bell rang and we took our places. Good morning, class, said Dr. Bleekman. I want to introduce you to Mr. John Smith. Mr. Smith will be your teacher for the rest of the year. The rest of the year? I couldn't believe my ears. What happened to Miss Schwartz? Without intending to, I asked that question.